I heard my own daughter say that I was a burden, and it wasn't said as a joke, nor on impulse. She said it with strategy, with calculation. They forgot to turn off the video call, and it was as if the universe had decided to show me, once and for all, who those people I called family really were. My name is Eleanor Mathers. I'm 74 years old, widowed for almost a decade, mother of a single daughter, grandmother to 2 teenagers. I always believed that aging was a natural process, not a punishment. I thought that, after everything I'd given, I would be welcomed with love. But all it took was overhearing one leaked conversation for a lifetime of certainties to crumble in seconds. I was there, in the living room armchair, with a still warm cup in my hand, when I heard my daughter say, "Mom's going to fall right into place, just like last time." At that moment, my granddaughter laughed, and then my son-in-law said, in that tone that had always struck me as too polite to be honest, "Once she signs the insurance and power of attorney papers, we'll start looking for a more suitable place." I froze. They were plotting, discussing me as if I were a logistical problem, someone to be discarded with elegance. I could barely process what came next. She's good with plants, but stupid with people. It'll be easy. The image of them smiling, toasting with wine as they decided my fate burned me from the inside like acid. If you had seen me at that moment, you might not have noticed anything. I remained motionless, eyes fixed on the bookshelf, as if still listening to the video call. But inside, it was as if my chest had collapsed. Every silence I'd ignored, every excuse for their absences, every little discomfort, they all took shape. It was as if a fog had lifted, and everything became cruelly clear. For years, I refused to believe my daughter could distance herself out of selfishness. I always thought it was just life's hustle. But there, listening to that conversation, I realized she'd merely found it convenient to keep me around, until she didn't. I wanted to get up, to do something, maybe to scream, but I stayed seated for over an hour, listening without being heard. When the call finally ended and silence returned to the room, everything had changed. I didn't cry, not then, but something inside me had died, something essential. Trust, ground beneath my feet, the unconditional love only a mother can maintain even in the worst storms. Little did I know that night wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything yet to come. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully risen when I opened the kitchen curtains and let the cool dawn light in. I used to start my days with tea and the radio, listening to the news while tending to the plants on the windowsill. But that day, the kettle sat cold on the stove, forgotten. In its place came memories. Every gesture, every recent word from Evelyn, my daughter, began to replay in my mind. The note asking me to sign some health plan documents. Her insistence that I transfer my account to a bank with more online convenience. It all made sense now, and the meaning was terrifying. That very morning, I called my bank and requested to suspend any unauthorized movements. I canceled the joint cards, changed the passwords. I retrieved the folder where I kept important papers, my late husband George's life insurance documents, and began rereading, everything with sharper eyes. That's when I realized how imprudent it had been to trust so blindly. Evelyn had always been articulate, persuasive, and I, a mother wanting to please, wanting to make things easier. I saw that, unknowingly, I had handed too many tools to the wrong hands. The week before that call, Evelyn had taken me to the notary to sign an update to the inventory. I didn't even read it properly. I trusted her. She hugged me tightly on the way out, saying it was just a formality, to protect my assets. I felt cared for. I felt respected. But now, regret gnawed at me. I needed to know exactly what I'd signed. I called George's former lawyer, who now practiced in another city, and arranged an in-person consultation. I told her it was urgent, that I might be being deceived by my own daughter. She didn't seem surprised. Unfortunately, this is more common than you'd imagine, Mrs. Mathers. Even with all this happening, I hesitated to tell anyone, out of shame perhaps, or fear, because admitting you're being used by someone you love is admitting that something within you failed, that you didn't notice, that you let yourself be swayed. But the worst pain wasn't that. The worst pain was feeling that perhaps the love I'd offered with such purity hadn't been enough to teach them to respect me. I'd raised my daughter alone for many years, with every penny, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. And now I ask myself, where did I go wrong? I arrived at Dr. Helena's office 2 days later, folder of documents in hand and heart, sunk by uncertainty. The building was old, with creaking stairs and the scent of old paper, the kind of place that felt more familiar than the modern offices Evelyn now frequented, with their high heels and polished words. Helena greeted me with a firm yet welcoming look. We sat side by side, not face to face. I thanked her for that. Talking about my daughter embarrassed me more than anything. Let's look through this together. Calmly. Mrs. Mathers, she said. And it was there, page by page, that I discovered the extent of the trap. Between technical terms and camouflaged clauses, Helena translated the truth. The documents granted Evelyn full financial powers, including over real estate, investments, and medical decisions. There was a clause that, if interpreted conveniently, could be used to declare me mentally incapacitated, all signed by me, with notarized signature. I felt betrayed in a way I can't fully describe. It wasn't just the money. It was the intent, the coldness of someone who had studied the details of my life to control me without my noticing, a daughter who no longer saw me as a person, but as a resource to be managed. I left with a plan. Revoke everything. Start the legal process to annul the authorizations, block accesses, make it clear I was still here, lucid, present, aware. Helena prepared the paperwork, explained the steps, and said she would accompany me through each one. I thanked her, voice wavering. What if she tries to confront me? I asked, not fearing the confrontation itself, but what its revelations might bring. She will, Helena replied, but this time you'll be ready. And although I felt fear dancing in my stomach, something in me began to awaken. An ancient courage, perhaps the same that had led me to raise a daughter alone decades ago, facing the world with my own hands. That night at home, I made chamomile tea and sat on the sofa with the wool blanket George used on. Cold nights, the silence of the house, which had once felt like a punishment, now sounded like protection. I placed the kettle back on its stand and stared at my living room. Each object, each frame, each plant I'd nurtured with patience. All of it was mine, built with sweat, with losses, with love. And now they wanted to take it from me with false smiles and disguised signatures. I remembered little Evelyn lying on my lap, asking for stories. I read her fairy tales where villains always revealed themselves, where good triumphed in the end. But nobody tells you that in real life. Sometimes the wolf wears the little girl's coat you yourself taught to walk. I began seeing the details. The times Evelyn avoided leaving me alone with the grandchildren, as if afraid I'd say something. How she talked about my forgetfulness, always casually, but repeatedly, as if planting a doubt with patience. Her insistence that I take that natural sedative she brought me without a prescription. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces fit together. I was being slowly discredited, transformed, in her eyes and perhaps others, into a confused, fragile, imprudent old woman. But I was none of those things, and the moment to prove it had come. The following week, I took a step that scared me just thinking about it. I declined the Sunday dinner invitation. Evelyn always insisted on those dinners. Now I imagine it was to maintain appearances. I made up that I had a medical appointment I couldn't postpone. She reacted with disguised irritation. But it's just a dinner, Mom. You're forgetting dates again? I swallowed hard and breathed deeply. I'm not forgetting anything, Evelyn. I just have other priorities now. Silence on the other end of the line stretched. Then she hung up abruptly, and I knew. The silent war had begun. The next day, flowers arrived. A small, handwritten card read, "Sorry about my tone. I only want what's best for you. With love, your daughter." It seemed sweet, but I knew it wasn't. It was an emotional control tactic, a reminder that she still thought she could bend me with pretty gestures. I threw the flowers away without guilt. For the first time, I allowed myself not to pretend gratitude. For the first time, I understood that true love doesn't need to be bought, or forced, or theatrical. And in that simple act of discarding the flowers, I felt a bit of the strength I thought I had lost. Sunday night, while they dined without me, I sat on the porch with a glass of white wine and a blanket over my legs. The sky was clear, and for the first time in a long while, I heard my own thoughts without fear. No one interrupted me, tried to diminish me with false kindness, or treated me like a burden in a sweet voice. The cold air did me good. I felt like painting, something I hadn't done in months. I fetched my brushes from the hallway closet, dusted them off, improvised an easel on the porch table, and began sketching the shadows of the trees under the streetlight. Each stroke reminded me who I was before feeling disposable. On Monday, Leo, my younger grandson, called. His voice sounded unpracticed. "Hi, Grandma. Mom said you're sick, that you're having trouble remembering things. Is that true?" My hand trembled as I held the phone. "No, dear. I'm fine. Whoever said that is misinformed." There was silence on the other end. "She said you forgot to pick us up from school the other day." I chuckled bitterly. "You know I don't have a car, Leo. How would I pick you up if I haven't driven in over 10 years? He didn't respond. And in that moment, I realized what Evelyn was doing. She was planting doubts even in the children, crafting an image of me that wasn't true, justifying what would come next. The following weeks were marked by cold distance. Evelyn no longer called me. The children didn't visit, not even for a quick hello. Natalie, my daughter-in-law, always more decorative figure than true presence, sent a generic message. "We're busy with the kids. School. We'll visit soon." I didn't reply. I knew silence bothered them more than any complaint. Meanwhile, with Helena's help, I completed the revocation of the legal authorizations I had signed. Everything proceeded with the new documentation. My will was redrafted, my account transferred to another bank, my health plan adjusted. Each decision was a stake I drove into the ground of my independence. When Evelyn finally appeared at my door, almost a month later, her face wore a mask of forced concern. "Mom, what's going on? You disappeared. The boys miss you. I miss you too." She brought a store-bought cake she claimed to have made herself. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She looked surprised. "You're not going to let me in?" I crossed my arms. "I'd rather talk out here." The street was quiet. The cold wind bit, but I held my ground. Evelyn tried to keep her tone sweet, but I saw the anger behind her eyes. "I heard you revoked the documents. Why? It upsets me greatly." "Mom, because I read them carefully and realized they weren't meant to protect me but to control me." My voice was calm but firm. Evelyn furrowed her brow, unnaturally raised. "I can't believe you're doubting me." She crossed her arms. "I've always taken care of you. I always wanted your best." I smiled without warmth. "You didn't want my best. You wanted my name. You wanted my signature. You wanted my silence. But I'm still here, Evelyn. I'm still your mother. And contrary to what you think, I'm not stupid." The silence between us lingered. She averted her eyes. For the first time, she had no response. She called me ungrateful, said I was doing all this out of spite, that the world was dangerous and I needed help. I replied, looking her straight in the eyes. "True concern doesn't trample someone's dignity. You weren't helping me. You were erasing me, Evelyn." Little by little, I could see her mask slip, the tension in her shoulders, the harsher tone, the look that no longer feigned compassion. She realized she wouldn't have control, and as she turned away, she whispered, a veiled threat. "You'll regret this." But I wouldn't. Not anymore. I closed the door calmly, sat on the sofa, and breathed deeply. For the first time in a long while, the weight on my chest felt lighter. I cried, yes, but it was a different kind of cry, not of despair or loss. It was as if I were washing every remnant of the emotional dependence Evelyn had imposed on me from the inside out. I knew consequences would come, that they'd try to reach me by other means. But in that moment, I was no longer the same. I had rediscovered the woman behind the mother, the woman who had the right to live without asking permission, and nothing could take that from me. The next week, I blocked Evelyn's, Natalie's, and even the children's numbers, not because I didn't love them, but because I needed silence to reorganize my heart. Helena said it was important to protect my emotional well-being, not just my money. So, beyond the legal measures, I began making small changes around the house. I replaced the rugs, painted the living room wall, bought new bedding sets, little things that helped mark my new beginning. Every time I spread a clean sheet or placed a fresh flower in the kitchen vase, it was as if I were telling myself, you still have choice. You still have life. It was while washing the living room curtains that I received a letter on thick stationery bearing a law firm's crest. It was an informal notification. Evelyn wanted to discuss the assets in my name legally. She claimed my recent change of attitude indicated possible emotional instability. I sat on the sofa and laughed, out loud, in disbelief. After everything, she was still trying to flip the script, paint me as unbalanced, confused, incapable. Little did she know this strategy only strengthened my case. I returned to consult Helena, who calmly prepared our response documents. "We'll reply with serenity and proof," she said. "She's digging her own grave." And so we did. I presented medical certificates affirming my full sanity, bank statements proving unauthorized withdrawals made with my card by third parties before the revocation, declarations from neighbors who witnessed my independent routine. It was sad to have to prove I wasn't crazy, but even sadder to realize my own daughter believed she could silence me with legal threats. During this process, I began receiving calls from unknown numbers. Anonymous. Messages, some aggressive, others feigning concern. I ignored them all. By then, I no longer needed explanations. Actions spoke for themselves. It was around that time I reconnected with someone I hadn't seen in over 20 years. Francis, a friend from when George was still alive. He showed up by chance at a municipal library reading club meeting. White hair, deep voice, gentle smile that reminded me of who I was long before any of this began. Francis had lost his wife 3 years earlier. We talked for hours that afternoon about books, children, absence, and time. He listened patiently, without interrupting or trying to fix anything. Just listened. When I shared, embarrassed, part of what I was going through, he gently squeezed my hand and said, "There's no shame in surviving abandonment, Eleanor. Shame belongs to those who abandon." His words entered me like a balm. It was as if someone finally saw me, not as a problem, but as a whole person, wounded but standing. In the following, months, Francis became a fixture in my routine. Saturday coffees, midweek calls, slow walks in the city's parks. There were no promises or plans, just presence, and that was enough. No one knew about this new bond, not out of secrecy, but for protection. I wanted to preserve what was only mine, without the family's judgmental gaze. Bit by bit, I began to smile again, to paint with brighter colors, to eat with appetite. It was as if I were rediscovering myself, as if the woman frozen by pain was finally surfacing. Then one day, Leo, my younger grandson, appeared at my door, shoulders hunched and eyes downcast. I hesitated, heart pounding. I opened the door cautiously. He looked at me with a mixture of regret and shame. "Grandma, I know we messed up. Mom messed up. I saw some messages. I heard some conversations. I just wanted to know if I could see you sometimes. Just to talk." I said nothing at first, but made room for him to come in. Because despite everything, part of me still hoped. Something good could sprout from that scorched earth. Leo sat in the armchair by the window, the same one George used to read his Sunday paper. He'd grown so much. No longer the chubby-cheeked boy who begged me for chocolate pancakes on vacation mornings. Now a tall, lanky teenager, with the same restless gaze shaded by something heavy. "Are you mad at me, Grandma?" he asked. I paused a moment, then shook my head. "No, Leo. I'm in pain, but not angry." We talked for over an hour. He didn't ask for money or try to defend anyone. He just spoke. He told me about school, the struggles with his parents, the fears, the doubts. He asked about Grandpa George, about my youth, about the things nobody else seemed to want to hear. It was the first time in years I felt seen by someone in the family. When he left with a timid hug, I stayed on the porch for a long time, watching the sky change color. I didn't know if that was a real reunion or just an isolated moment. But I decided to allow it. Because there was something about that boy that deserved a chance to be different. Over the following weeks, Leo visited often, sometimes just to help with the garden, other times to study quietly while I painted. We never spoke of Evelyn. I never asked. He never offered. There was an unspoken agreement between us. This was a place free of manipulation, a refuge, and that seemed enough. Until one day, he brought his older sister, Emily. She was more reserved, more skeptical. "Mom said you're trying to separate the family, that you're too hurt to think clearly." I took a deep breath. "And you, Emily, what do you think?" She didn't answer immediately but stayed, took tea with me, and returned the following week. Even then, nothing made me lower my guard. I knew Evelyn would try to reconcile at some point, and she did. A month later, she showed up unannounced with a wrapped gift, a blue sweater, my favorite color, which she'd never noticed before. "Can we talk?" she said, without beating around. "The bush." I agreed, but not inside the house. We sat on the porch. The late afternoon light hit us from the side, giving everything that melancholic tone of things about to change. "I was wrong," she said, then fell silent, perhaps waiting for me to help her continue. "Why were you wrong, Evelyn?" I asked. She looked at me, flustered. "Because, I don't know. Maybe fear. Fear of the future. Fear of having to handle everything alone. And also, greed, maybe." She uttered the word as if it were bitter on her tongue. "But hearing you say I was erasing you, that hurt because deep down, I knew it was true. That moved me. It wasn't a rehearsed apology. It was the tremulous voice of someone seeing, perhaps for the first time, her own unfiltered reflection. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I wanted to try to rebuild something, even if small." I didn't reply immediately. I watched the jabuticaba tree's leaves dance in the wind. George planted that tree on our third wedding anniversary. I'd seen many seasons pass, some more arid than others. Forgiveness, Evelyn, isn't something we give like a birthday present. It's built. And honestly, I don't know if I want or can give it you now. She nodded, eyes brimming. And for the first time, she didn't insist. She simply said, "All right, I understand. If one day you want, I'll be here." And she left. No dramatics, no demands. And that, in itself, was a beginning. That night after Evelyn went home, I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief or anger. I felt only deep fatigue, like someone who's carried a great weight for too long and only now realized it. I sat in the dark living room, listening to the old wall clock, my parents' heirloom, tick like footsteps towards something greater to come. It wasn't about forgiveness then. It was about finding my center again, and knowing that, with or without reconciliation, I'd reclaimed ownership of myself. No one could ever take that away. In the days that followed, I returned to therapy. A hard decision, but necessary. I felt I needed to relearn how to listen to myself. My psychologist, Clara, was patient and firm. "You've spent years placed in a position of constructed uselessness, but your story isn't over. It was merely hijacked by people who didn't know how to value it." Her words hit me like sweet punches. I brought notebooks and wrote about my memories, about what George told me on fearful nights, about the scent of the garden on good days. It was like gathering pieces of myself scattered inside my soul. Francis remained present, so present that sometimes I forgot he hadn't always been part of my life. He'd take me to Sunday fairs, make me laugh with silly jokes about soap operas he claimed to hate but clearly followed. One day, he brought a light wooden frame for you to put that lavender field watercolor in. "That one has light, Eleanor, has soul." And I cried, because it had been so long since someone spoke about my art with shining eyes, rather than as a lonely elderly pastime. With him, everything was light, and that lightness was a healing I didn't know I needed. Leo and Emily kept in constant touch. Sometimes they came for Saturday lunches. Other times they stopped by just to give a quick kiss before swim class or study session. They never asked for anything, never expected anything. They just came, and after everything, that was a gift I never expected. Over time, they began to share their conflicts with their parents, small breaches of trust that now made more sense to them. I didn't intervene. I just listened, as if my listening could silently stitch together the pieces they themselves were trying to understand. One autumn afternoon, with an orange sky and the smell of dry leaves in the air, I made a decision. I would sell the house. Not out of anger or impulse, but because that house had been symbolically taken from me even before any contract. It had been invaded by disguised contempt, veiled interest, silent pain from all. Those afternoons I was ignored in my own home. I needed a new physical space to seal my internal rebirth. Elena handled everything, with security, firmness, respect. The sale was quick. Demand was high in that neighborhood. I found a small ground-floor apartment in a leafy condominium. Nothing luxurious, but full of sunlight, with a balcony for my plants and a room perfect for my studio. It was enough. For the first time in many years, I didn't need much to feel at home. Just freedom. I moved on. A Saturday with Francis, the grandchildren, and a trusted moving company. I took only the essentials. My watercolors, favorite cups, a few photos of George, and the letters he wrote while serving in the army. Everything else I donated or sold. I said goodbye with gratitude, because even places of pain teach us something. In my new home, I established new routines. Coffee at 6:30 a.m., painting until noon, a light lunch, and reading in the hammock. On Tuesdays, senior dance class. On Thursdays, a reading group. On Sundays, when I felt brave, I wrote letters to myself, reminding myself how hard it was to get here, not to relive the pain, but to never forget the strength that brought me to this new chapter. Sometimes, I look at the shelf and see the lavender painting Francis gave me. It reminds me there's beauty even after devastation, and that starting over, though scary, is an act of silent courage. Evelyn sent me flowers at Christmas, a discreet card asking for a visit. I kept the flowers. I still wasn't sure I wanted to open the door again, but I didn't feel hatred. I felt only the maturity of someone who understands that not every bond must be torn apart with shouting. Some unravel over time, others mend slowly, if there's genuine will. The choice would be mine. For the first time, entirely mine. And that was more precious than any rushed reconciliation. Early in January, I received an unexpected call from Leo's school principal. She invited me to a small student art exhibition, and Leo had mentioned his grandmother painted. I found it curious. I smiled alone at the memory of how he'd watched me in silence in the studio, keen eyes on every detail, even as he pretended disinterest. I accepted the invitation. On the day of the exhibition, I wore a light blue dress and a printed scarf George had given me on our last anniversary together. Upon entering the school hall, I saw one of my watercolors, The Lavender Field, reproduced on cardstock, signed by Leo, inspired by my grandmother, Eleanor Mathers. My heart tightened. It was as if that boy had understood more about love in a few weeks than many people understand in a lifetime. He introduced me to the teacher as the original artist, and then to his classmates. It was a new generation, full of ideas, full of respect. There, among children and teenagers, I felt less old, less disposable. I felt part of something. When we returned home, Leo gave me an envelope with a drawing he made just for me, a sketch of me painting on the porch. "You look happy here, Grandma, and strong." I treasured that paper like a trophy. Francis was there for every step of my rebuilding, but never invasive. He said that mature love is like classical music. It needs silence around to reveal itself. With him, days were simple and full of tenderness. Sometimes we'd dance in the living room without music, just because. Other times, we'd sit in silence, reading side by side, sharing the light of an old lamp. He never asked about Evelyn. But one evening, he told me, "If one day you want to open a new door, let it be by choice, never by need." That phrase stayed with me for days, not as advice, but as a reminder of how far I'd come, not as guidance, but as affirmation of the miles I'd walked. Evelyn's messages remained sporadic, timid, almost pleading for a response. But I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because I wasn't ready. Forgiveness, for me, wasn't an automatic return. It was an internal stitching process. And though the scars, though closed, still stung when touched, I didn't let that harden me. I continued offering affection to those who deserved it, continued saying yes to what brought me joy. I learned that being firm doesn't mean being cruel, and that protecting oneself is also an act of love, especially for oneself. One rainy afternoon in March, Emily visited me, alone this time. She was more serious, more introspective. She sat on the porch with me, sipping hibiscus tea in silence. After a few minutes, she looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "I'm ashamed of what we did, Grandma, of how we were complicit, of how we let it happen. You didn't deserve that. No grandmother does." I gently took her hand. "I made mistakes too, Emily. I stayed silent for so long. But here we are, now, and that's already something." She rested her head on my shoulder. We stayed there, unrushed, stitching together what could still be saved. Over time, I realized what I once called my family had transformed. It was no longer based on roles, surnames, or tradition. My family now consisted of those who chose me daily, those who treated me truthfully. Helena, with her unwavering ethics. Clara, my therapist, who returned my ability to listen. Francis, with his gentle presence and healing silences. Leo and Emily, learning to be better than their parents. These people shaped the new contours of my life, and I learned that chosen bonds are as valuable, if not more, than blood ties. Selling the old house gave me financial freedom I never imagined. Not to splurge, but to care for myself without guilt. I set aside an emergency fund, upgraded my health plan, and reserved money for a trip. For the first time in years, I thought about traveling alone. I went to a travel agency and asked for suggestions for women over 70 who love nature and history. The attendant smiled. "We have the perfect itinerary for you. Tuscany in spring." My eyes lit up. George always dreamed of going there, but life never allowed it. Now it was my turn, and I would go not to escape anything, but to celebrate all I'd regained. The trip to Tuscany was more than a vacation. It was a rite of passage. I arrived in Florence on a gentle April morning, luggage light and heart open. For 10 days, I wandered silent villages, tasted artisanal bread with freshly pressed olive oil, visited museums George would have adored, and painted. I painted as I hadn't since he stood by my side, holding his coffee cup while I selected colors. I sketched vineyards, windows with white curtains, gardens of lavender. It was as if each line whispered, "You are alive, whole, and enough." I met women of all ages on the tour, some widowed, others divorced, others who simply decided to live differently. We shared stories, laughed loudly, drank wine without fear of being seen as improper. One of them, Margot, told me something I never forgot. We spend our lives waiting to be validated, when what we really need is to ask ourselves, "Am I enough for me?" That echoed within me like a mantra, and when I returned home, everything seemed clearer. Loneliness, once feared, now felt like fertile silence, and in that silence I discovered who I was, with more time, more lightness, more truth. I no longer needed anyone to tell me what I deserved. I knew, and that's why, when Evelyn wrote again saying she was in therapy and wanted to try for real, I took a deep breath and considered it. I didn't reply immediately. I waited. Weeks. Tested my own heart. Asked myself if the impulse came from guilt or compassion. And when I realized it was merely empathy, without erasing the past, but with willingness to respect the present, I decided to write back. "Evelyn, forgiveness isn't automatic, but I'm willing to talk. A real conversation. No excuses. No control. Just truth." She replied within hours. "Yes, I accept." We scheduled for a Saturday morning at a cafe near the park George used to take me to when we were young. The meeting felt awkward at first. We sat facing each other with 2 cups of tea between us and a vast silence overhead. Evelyn was different, less haughty, less performative. She told me about her therapy sessions, anxiety crises, fears she'd never voiced. She said she didn't want my house nor my money. She just wanted to try to know me again. She asked me not to rush, to be honest about my limits. And, for the first time, I heard my daughter without anger, still cautious, but less hurt. There was a woman before me trying to grow, not a daughter trying to outsmart me. We left the cafe with no promises, but with a possible beginning. I allowed that beginning as one plants a seed in new soil, without guarantees, but with faith, because learning to live for oneself doesn't exclude the possibility of forgiving. It just changes how we do it, not as concession, but as choice. And that Saturday, I chose to give Evelyn what she never gave me, a true chance, without manipulation, without strings, without theatrics. Just the chance that maybe one day we'd be 2 women who respect each other, before even being mother and daughter. After that meeting, Evelyn and I exchanged a few messages. Simple, almost formal, but without the weight of guilt or pressure before. Gradually, she began visiting the grandchildren when I had them. Never alone, never for long, but enough for me to see she might truly be trying to break patterns. Then one day, while cleaning my studio, I found one of the first watercolors I painted after the rupture. It was dark, in blues and grays, almost shapeless, a blurred landscape of pain. I placed it beside a recent one, full of yellows, greens, and lilacs, a field wide open with a path leading into the distance. I looked at both for a long time and realized they were both parts of me. That sadness also has its place, that the value of rebirth comes from the painful end before it. Neither piece would be discarded because no part of my story needs hiding. Then I knew what I'd say if someone asked me what I learned from it all. Never underestimate a woman who decides to live again, even after betrayal, rejection, loneliness, because when she returns, she comes whole. And when she rediscovers herself, she no longer accepts halves. I am that woman, and if you're listening now, Maybe you are too. Or perhaps you're on the brink of it. If I could go back in time, I'd tell that woman holding a trembling cup, silently hearing the voices plotting against her, "You're not alone. This pain will transform you." But that night, it all felt like an end. Today, I understand it was a beginning. My beginning for myself. The start of a version I never would have known if pushed into the abyss. Life can be cruel in its lessons, but also generous in allowing us to be reborn. Today, my mornings start with strong black coffee, classical music, and the scent of fresh paint. I paint by the open window light, listening to the world outside, and my world inside. I no longer expect calls, but when they come, I answer lightly. I no longer brood over silences. I learned that some voids are disguised blessings. I also learned to say no without justification, to refuse visits that don't do me good, to allow closeness without sacrificing my peace. I still have sad days. I still miss George. I still remember what I lost. But now those memories don't paralyze me. They're part of the soil where I planted new roots. Sometimes I write letters to him. I tell him I'm okay, that I have friends, that I still wear that lavender perfume he loved, that I painted the porch sea green, that I'm finally living with the freedom we both dreamed of, but only now became possible for me. The other day, Leo brought me news. He was accepted to a university out of state. Emily, meanwhile, started a psychology course. Both said they followed those paths because they saw me as an example of strength. I cried. I wasn't strong all the time, I said. And Leo replied, "But you were when it mattered. That's what counts." I hugged them both and knew that even if Evelyn and I never became what I once dreamed, something beautiful of my story would live on through them. Francis and I continue our gentle routine. We never formalized anything. We don't live together, but we share life. Sometimes he sleeps here. Sometimes I stay at his place. We have keys, but respect our spaces. We love with the wisdom of those who lost, forgave, and started over. And that's enough. He says, "My presence is a kind of music." I say his gaze is a kind of shelter. And we go on. Two old souls too young to stop feeling. Months later, Evelyn invited me to see her new apartment. Small, simple, organized. She said she wanted to show she was starting over too. I went. I brought flowers. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. We sat at the table, drank coffee, talked about books. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You're much stronger than I realized for so long." And I replied, "Because you only looked with your eyes. Today, maybe you're starting to see with your heart." She nodded, and for the first time, I felt no lies between us. On the way home, I walked slowly. The wind brushed my face like a caress. The sun was low but warm, and I thought, this is it. Life goes on. Always goes on. Not how we planned, but how we need. Sometimes it knocks us down to show us the strength we forgot we had. Sometimes it silences us to teach us to listen. And when we choose to hear what comes from within, without noise, without fear, we finally become whole. Today, I look at my story and no longer feel shame over any part of it, neither the pain, nor the fragility, nor the moments I let myself be deceived. Every mistake taught me where to set the boundaries I'll never let cross again. Every tear was a seed of lucidity that sprouted within me. I didn't become bitter. I became aware. And awareness is a light that, once lit, never goes out. It illuminates the dark corners that blind love once kept hidden. I return to visit the cemetery where George is buried. I bring simple flowers, sit by the headstone, and tell him about the grandchildren, about my new life, about the colors I've used in my watercolors. "You'd be proud of me," I always say. And deep down, I know he would be, because more than anything, George always wanted me to live with freedom. And I learned that freedom isn't the absence of bonds. It's choosing which bonds make us flourish. My book was adopted by support groups for older women. In one, a lady named Beatrice wrote, "You helped me say enough to my children, who treated me like a burden. For the first time, I felt brave. Those words made me cry, not from sadness, but from relief and understanding. Because now I knew my pain had become something useful. It had become a bridge, a voice, a mirror for others trapped in similar silences. Emily told me recently that Evelyn talks about me in therapy. She said she told her therapist she's rediscovered herself as a daughter, not a dependent, and that maybe, one day, when I'm ready, she'll want to walk beside me, side by side, without one having to carry the other. I don't await that day anxiously, but I don't dismiss it either. I learned that true reconciliations aren't marked on a calendar. They bloom like orchids, silent, mysterious, unpredictable. But when they arrive, breathtakingly beautiful. My studio remains my sanctuary. On one wall hang paintings I never sold, not because they lack value, but because they represent parts of me I'm still processing. A field under mist, a stormy sea, an empty chair by a window. They all tell stories I lived before I even realized. Sometimes I sit there with a glass of wine and simply gaze. I talk to my works as one speaks to old versions of oneself, and I always say, thank you for surviving. At 76, I no longer expect grand changes, but I remain open to small wonders. A well-made tea, a moving book, an unexpected call, and Evening walk with Francis, and I love you, spoken without rush. Life, I discovered, is full of small joys we only notice when we stop waiting for grand gestures. And it's in these little things that I've rediscovered meaning. Because dignity, I learned, also lives in everyday choices, in saying yes only when you want to, in saying no firmly and kindly. If you've listened this far, I want to thank you. Because telling this story wasn't easy. Reopening wounds never is. But it was necessary. Because perhaps you're going through something similar. Perhaps you've felt forgotten, diminished, used. And I want to tell you, with all the strength in my heart, you are still here. There is still time. There is still room. There is still light. Even when everything seems dark. Even when the world tries to convince you it's too late. It's not. It never is. Sometimes we must lose almost everything to realize what we should never have left behind. Ourselves. For years I was called dramatic too. Sensitive, difficult. But today I understand that sensitivity is not weakness. It's the capacity to feel what others refuse to see. And being difficult is often the label given to women who refuse to be controlled. If you're living something similar, know this. You are not crazy. You are waking up. My greatest pride isn't having written a book, nor having sold paintings, nor even having regained financial independence. My greatest pride is having reclaimed my voice. The voice they taught me to. Silence in the name of peace. The voice I lost amid phrases like, it's just concern, or, we're doing this for you. No, they did it out of convenience, out of fear, out of greed. And when I realized that, I chose to stop being background and become the protagonist of my own story again. Today, my life isn't perfect, but it's mine. And that's enough. I have my pains, yes, but they no longer define me. I have my past, but it no longer imprisons me. And I have my affections, my silences, my mornings, of filtered light in the studio. I also have faith in good days, even if they come surrounded by shadows. And above all, I have the certainty that growing old is not disappearing. It's emerging, stripped of masks, whole in essence. If you're hearing this story with tears in your eyes, a lump in your throat, or your heart tight, take a deep breath. You are not alone. There are others like us. Women who survived being set aside and still managed to bloom. Women who learned that you don't beg for love, nor plead for respect. You build it, and if it doesn't exist, you walk away, even with trembling steps, even with fear, because freedom is worth the risk, always. And if doubt returns, it will. Remember this, you have the right to start over. No matter your age, no matter who betrayed you, no matter how many times they told you it was too late. Life always leaves a crack for the light to enter, and you deserve to warm yourself in it, as I did, as so many of us are still learning to do. Because the truth is simple and powerful. You are still here, and that's all it takes to begin. Thank you for listening to my story to the end. If it moved you in any way, please, comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far this message reached. Like and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe. Because here, we keep giving voice to those who should never have been silenced.